You know those moments when your entire life changes in the most unexpected way? Well, sit back, because I'm about to tell you an incredible story about a man named Michael Thornton, whose ordinary life took an extraordinary turn when he found himself being followed by a group of eagles. And trust me, the reason behind it will bring tears to your eyes. Picture a small harbor town on the west coast, where our story begins. Michael was your typical port foreman, the kind of guy who lived and breathed the rhythm of ships coming and going. He had a modest life, living alone in a simple second-floor apartment of an old brick building near the harbor. His daily routine was as predictable as the tides, up at 5:30 a.m., off to oversee the loading and unloading of ships. After 10 years at the port, Michael had become something of a living legend. He knew every loading procedure by heart, every nook and cranny of the pier, and could probably recite the names of all the ship captains in his sleep. His colleagues respected him for his fairness and straightforward approach, the kind of guy you could always count on to do the right thing. One particularly chilly October morning, when the sea wind was cutting right through to the bone and the sky was hanging low with gray clouds, Michael bundled up in his old work jacket, grabbed his thermos of hot coffee, and headed out. Now, this is where things start to get interesting. While checking the day's shipping schedule, 3 cargo ships expected that day, Michael noticed something that would change everything. Through the lifting morning fog, as the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, he spotted a lone bald eagle by the edge of the pier. But this wasn't just any eagle. This was a magnificent specimen, unusually large, with a snow-white head that stood out dramatically against its dark feathers. The bird sat there like a statue, its sharp eyes fixed on the water below, talons firmly gripping the pier's metal edge. Michael had never seen an eagle this close before. In the morning light, its feathers had this beautiful bronze sheen to them. When the eagle turned its head and locked eyes with Michael, time seemed to stand still. It was one of those moments that just stays with you, you know? Michael remembered the sandwich in his bag, ham, as luck would have it. Moving with the kind of caution you'd use around a sleeping baby, he slowly pulled it out. The eagle watched his every move, turning its head slightly to track his movements. Here's the surprising part. Instead of flying away when Michael carefully placed a piece of meat on the pier's edge, the eagle just tilted its head curiously, those amber eyes studying the offering like a food critic at a fancy restaurant. Then, with movements so gentle they seemed almost choreographed, the bird stepped forward, its talons making soft tapping sounds on the concrete. Michael held his breath as the eagle approached the meat. With one swift motion, it snatched the offering, took a careful step back, and quickly gulped down its breakfast. But here's where things get even more interesting. The next day, that same eagle was back, in the exact same spot, striking the same pose, as if they had a standing appointment. Michael, who had almost expected this reunion, had actually stopped by a shop on his way to work to buy some fresh meat. This time, the eagle showed a bit more confidence, approaching more quickly than before. It was like watching a friendship bloom in slow motion, you know? Word started spreading around the port about Michael's unusual morning routine. His colleagues had mixed reactions. Some thought he was taking unnecessary risks. I mean, we're talking about a wild eagle here. While others were absolutely fascinated. The shift supervisor gave him the obligatory safety warning, but nobody actually told him to stop. Within a week, something remarkable happened. The eagle was taking food directly from Michael's hand. Now, if you've ever tried to build trust with any wild animal, you know what a big deal this is. It required absolute trust from both sides. Michael had to learn the perfect way to hold the meat, and the eagle had to learn how to take it without accidentally scratching him with those impressive talons. The story of the Eagle Whisperer, as some started calling him, spread through the port like wildfire. Workers began showing up early just to witness this unusual friendship firsthand. Photos of Michael with his feathered friends started appearing on the port's bulletin board. But just when everyone thought they'd seen it all, the situation took an even more extraordinary turn. One morning, Michael arrived to find not one, but 5 eagles standing at various levels along the pier. Each bird had its own distinct characteristics. One was notably larger than the others, another had a small scar on its beak. But the truly remarkable part, these eagles weren't just comfortable around Michael, they actually started following him around the port. When he'd go inside a building, they'd circle overhead. During ship unloading, they'd perch on containers. watching the proceedings like feathered supervisors. The situation grew more surreal by the day. Soon, these magnificent birds started appearing near Michael's home, resting on neighboring rooftops. Their figures would stand out against the evening sky, and in the mornings they'd escort him to work, maintaining a respectful distance as they flew alongside him. It was like having your own personal honor guard of eagles. Naturally curious about this bizarre behavior, Michael decided to take a risk. He managed to attach a small camera with a GPS tracker to the leg of the largest eagle, using some meat as a distraction. The data he collected revealed something fascinating. These eagles were following a precise route between the port, his house, and an area about 15 kilometers outside of town. They repeated this pattern almost daily, as if following some invisible skyway. But life has a way of throwing complications at you, doesn't it? The port administration wasn't exactly thrilled about their new winged visitors. The eagles were distracting workers, making customers nervous, and sometimes causing delays when they decided to camp out on containers. It all came to a head when the port director called Michael into his office for what you might call a frank discussion. The ultimatum was clear. Either the eagles had to go, or Michael would be looking for a new job. He had 3 days to figure it out. After a sleepless night wrestling with this impossible choice, Michael came up with a plan. He gathered some colleagues armed with noisemakers, hoping to scare the birds away humanely. When they set off their devices early one morning, the eagles scattered in panic, their wings cutting through the air as they disappeared beyond the horizon. The port returned to normal, and Michael kept his job, but his heart was heavy. He kept checking the GPS tracker's signal, hoping to understand where his feathered friends had gone. A few days later, following the tracker's signal, Michael found himself standing in front of a small single-story house on the outskirts of town. The same eagles were sitting peacefully in the surrounding trees, looking as if they'd found a new sanctuary. Gathering his courage, Michael approached the door, his hand trembling slightly as he pressed the doorbell. The footsteps that approached from inside led to a moment that would change everything once again. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged woman whose eyes widened in shock at the sight of Michael. She nearly fainted. Thankfully, Michael caught her in time. Inside, the walls were covered with photos, including one that stopped Michael in his tracks. A man who looked remarkably like him, feeding the same eagles. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Anderson. Her husband, James, a marine biologist who had spent the last 5 years studying eagle behavior, had passed away just 2 months earlier. These eagles had been a huge part of their lives, visiting their home daily. James's journey with the eagles had begun with rescuing an injured bird, and gradually, more eagles had joined the rehabilitated one. He had meticulously documented each eagle's habits, personality, and dietary preferences, giving each bird a name. When James died suddenly of a heart attack, both Sarah and the eagles were left devastated. The birds continued their daily visits, seemingly searching for their missing friend. When they spotted Michael at the port, with his uncanny resemblance to James, the same features, posture, even similar movements, they had recognized something familiar in him and began following him just as they had once followed James. Sarah proposed an elegant solution. Michael could visit on weekends, allowing the eagles to maintain their connection to both James's home and their new friend. Their first gathering in Sarah's garden was emotional. Michael brought fresh meat, and the eagles descended from the trees without hesitation while Sarah watched through tears, past and present merging in a beautiful moment. A new tradition was born. Every weekend, Michael would visit Sarah, and together, they would feed the eagles. Sarah shared stories about James, while Michael reported his observations. A genuine friendship developed between them. The eagles, seeming to understand this new arrangement, stopped appearing at the port and instead divided their time between hunting in the wild during the week and gathering in Sarah's garden on weekends. Sarah shared James's research with Michael. His office was a manifestation of his dedication, filled with hundreds of photos documenting each eagle's life. The oldest eagle, nicknamed King due to the distinctive scar on his back, was the first bird James had rescued. King always arrived first and left last, like a faithful guardian. The group included a young eagle couple that had joined the previous year, believed to be offspring of the older birds. These younger eagles often put on aerial displays above the garden, adding a playful element to their gatherings. Sarah gradually transformed the garden into a bird paradise, adding special rests, feeding stations, and even a small pond in a secluded corner. Michael's port experience proved invaluable as he helped enhance the garden, reinforcing bird structures and repairing old rests. The neighbors gradually accepted this unusual situation, with many coming to watch the eagles. Sarah began giving small tours to neighborhood children, explaining each eagle's unique personality, like how one preferred a particular apple tree branch, another always waited to eat last, and one had a special call just for Michael. A year after Michael's first eagle encounter, everything had changed. Sarah had found peace after her husband's loss, Michael had discovered a new purpose, and the eagles had found a new home. His story became a port legend, though some new workers still doubted its truth. Sarah began organizing James's research notes, planning to publish a book about his work. She and Michael continued his observations, even discovering an unfinished article about eagles' remarkable ability to form strong bonds not just with each other, but with humans as well. King, especially, formed a special bond with Michael, often sitting nearby as he worked in the garden, and sometimes following his car to the main road. Young eagles began nesting in tall trees within sight of the house, a rare behavior for wild birds, and their population grew naturally. Michael and Sarah grew closer, united by their care for the birds. By the end of the second year, the area around Sarah's house had become an unofficial sanctuary, attracting interest from local authorities who offered support for an educational center. Each evening, watching the sunset, Michael would reflect on the chain of events that had led him here. That single encounter with a lone eagle on the pier had triggered an incredible journey. Sarah often said that James would be happy to see his dream of creating a place where humans and birds could live in harmony had come true, even if not quite as he'd planned. Now, whenever someone asks Michael about his extraordinary story, he simply smiles and invites them to visit and see for themselves. Because sometimes, the most amazing things in life happen when we least expect them. We just have to be open to the possibility of magic. And you know what makes this story even more special? It reminds us that sometimes what looks like an ending, like James's passing, can actually be the beginning of something beautiful. It shows us how nature has its own way of healing hearts and bringing people together, even through loss and change. Those eagles didn't just bring Michael and Sarah together, they helped create something larger than themselves, a legacy that would continue to touch lives for years to come. Did you enjoy this video? Please let us know in the comments section down below. And don't forget to leave us a like and subscribe to the channel while you're at it. And please, turn on your notifications bell to get notified when we upload a new video. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.